She'd spent more summers than she could count in that old building, the dusty back office with its squeaky ceiling fan and the faint smell of ink and paper that never really went away. She'd grown up on the shop floor, her tiny hands sorting stock with the older employees who treated her like a little apprentice. After school, she'd sit at the worn-out desk in the corner, scribbling homework while listening to her father argue with suppliers and her mother haggle with customers like every sale was a small battle they had to win. By the time she was in high school, she knew the business better than she knew most of her friends. She could balance the books in her head, fix the ancient cash register when it jammed, and smooth over customer complaints before they turned ugly. When her parents talked about the future, about how the business would always stay in the family, they always said it in a way that made her feel like she was part of that plan. A piece of the legacy her grandparents had sweated and sacrificed to build. Then her sister came home from college. She had a knack for charm, that was true. Where she was steady and methodical, her sister was all bright smiles and easy chatter. She could sell a paperclip to a man drowning in office supplies, her mother liked to say with a proud laugh. When they stood side by side behind the counter, people always noticed the sister first, the one with the sparkling eyes and quick jokes. She'd watch them and wonder if her quieter way of doing things would ever be enough. When her parents announced their retirement, they didn't do it in some formal meeting. They sat the sisters down in the back office one Friday night, the old coffee maker sputtering away in the corner like it was trying to break the tension. "We've been talking," her father said, his hands folded on the desk the same way he used to do when he scolded them for fighting as kids. "It's time for us to step back. We're not getting any younger. And the business needs new energy, someone with a vision." Her heart raced, not out of greed, but because she'd already imagined what she'd do with that chance. Modernize the books, fix the supplier contracts, build loyalty programs for the customers who still came in every holiday season just because they trusted their name. She wasn't looking for a crown, she just wanted to keep what their grandparents had built alive. Her mother's eyes flicked toward her sister, and her stomach dropped before they even said the words. "We think your sister should take the lead," her mother said gently. "You know, she's so good with people. So full of ideas. And you've always been so steady. We know you'll be there to help her." She felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to nod. Of course, she heard herself say, though it sounded like someone else's voice. "Whatever's best for the family." Her sister squealed and wrapped their parents in a hug, already throwing out big plans, pop-up sales, fancy rebrands, and new logo she'd doodled on a napkin the week before. They hung on every word. She sat back in her old chair, the cushion torn and familiar beneath her palms, and watched the future slip out from under her in real time. Later that night, when the lights were off and her sister was off celebrating with friends, she stayed behind to close up the books for the week, because someone still had to do it. She ran her fingers over the photos on the office wall, her grandparents behind the original counter, her parents in their matching aprons, her as a kid sweeping the front steps after closing. For a moment, she wondered if any of them would have given it away so easily if they knew how it would feel to be left on the outside. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the night air, telling herself it didn't matter. She'd find her own way, even if it wasn't here. After all, she'd always been good at cleaning up behind others. She just didn't know yet how much cleaning up she'd have to do. She didn't step foot behind that counter for a long time after they handed it over. She'd told herself she needed distance, a clean break. She took the first job she could find that would get her out of town, out of the same small streets where every old customer would stop her in the supermarket and ask how the family business was going, like it was still hers to answer for. She found an apartment on the edge of the city, an hour's drive from the old storefront. Small, nothing special, but it was hers, and when she turned the key in the lock each night, she knew every bill, every grocery bag, every chipped mug on the counter was something she'd earned without waiting for someone else's blessing. That mattered more than she'd ever admit out loud. For a while, she kept tabs from a distance. She'd see the bright posts on social media, her sister posing in the front window with glittering balloons for some half-baked grand rebranding, captioned with lines like "taking our family legacy into the future." They made her chest ache in a way she hated. But she didn't let herself comment, didn't let herself send the texts she sometimes drafted at midnight when the old sense of responsibility threatened to pull her back. She worked hard at her new job. Long hours, yes, but at least when she put in that work, she saw the payoff in her own paycheck, not someone else's. She got promoted twice in 3 years, nothing flashy but enough to let her trade the old couch for a second-hand one without springs poking through, enough to eat something better than boxed noodles every night. She saved quietly, methodically, like she'd done with everything else in her life. Back home, the stories started trickling through the family grapevine. A cousin would drop it over coffee. "Did you hear about that new supplier she brought in? Cost double what the old one did." Or an old employee would run into her in the city, hugging her like they'd found a life raft, whispering that hours were being cut, paychecks late more than once. She'd nod, press a 10 or a 20 into their hand if she could, and send them back with nothing more than a soft, "hang in there." Every holiday, she braced herself. Her sister would sweep into family dinners in some flashy new outfit, dropping words like expansion and brand partnerships that sounded shiny but felt hollow when you looked closer. Her parents, still so desperate to believe they'd made the right choice, would beam like proud royalty, ignoring the fact that the books were a mess, the staff turnover worse every month. If she tried to gently ask, her mother would brush her off, "You've got your own life now. Let your sister handle it." So she did. She let her sister handle it, watched as the fancy window displays gathered dust, as the old regulars drifted to new places where they didn't have to fight over sloppy service or empty shelves. She heard about the parties her sister threw for her friends in the back room, the same back room she used to sweep out every Saturday morning after working a closing shift late into the night. Sometimes, late at night in her small apartment, she'd lie awake and stare at the ceiling, the hum of the city outside her window so different from the soft creak of the shop's old floors. She'd think about her grandparents, the way they'd scrubbed those floors on hands and knees, how they'd taught her that you never took more than you'd earned, that pride came from paying your dues, not from just bearing the family name. She'd tried to let it go. She really had. But the legacy wasn't a store or a brand or a set of keys. It was a promise, one she could feel slipping through her sister's fingers, one mistake at a time. And part of her, the part she'd locked away behind polite smiles and "I'm doing fine," knew that when it all came crashing down, they'd find her number in their phone. And they'd call. They always did. The call came on a Wednesday night, just after she'd finished dinner. She was sitting at her tiny kitchen table, laptop open to an expense sheet for her own freelance side gig she'd been growing on weekends. It was a small thing, but it made her feel safe, like if the world crumbled again, she'd have something they couldn't take from her. The phone buzzed and she almost didn't pick up when she saw her mother's name. They hadn't spoken much that month, just a few polite texts, mostly about whether she'd be home for the holidays and what to bring for dessert. But her gut told her this wasn't about pie or who was making the gravy. "Hi, Mom." Her mother's voice cracked before she could even get out a hello. "Sweetheart, do you have a minute? We need to talk." She pushed her dinner plate aside, her stomach already knotting up. What happened? Her mother didn't sugarcoat it, maybe she was too tired to keep pretending. The shop was a mess. The accountant had found unpaid invoices buried under piles of marketing flyers her sister had ordered but never used. Suppliers were refusing to send new stock until old bills were cleared, and word had spread that paychecks had bounced twice in the last month. A few of the best workers, the ones who'd been there since she was a kid sorting price tags in the back, had walked out when her sister showed up at a staff meeting with a designer purse worth more than 3 months' payroll. And sales? Dropping faster than they could spin an excuse. Longtime customers had drifted away, tired of coming in to find half-empty shelves and excuses. The once-loved family name was becoming a punchline, "Can't even keep the lights on but she's got a new car every 6 months." She barely realized she was gripping the edge of the table, her fingers going numb. All those years trying to push the guilt down, telling herself it wasn't her problem anymore. But the business wasn't just bricks and shelves, it was her grandparents' wedding photo framed by the register, her father's work boots left by the back door when she was little, the promise she'd made to them the last summer they were alive, "I'll take care of it someday." She cleared her throat, her voice calm even though her pulse hammered in her ears. "Where's my sister?" There was a pause, then her mother's voice turned small, like a child's. She's overwhelmed, honey. She didn't mean for it to get so bad. She's trying. But she doesn't know how to fix it. We thought maybe you could just come look at the books. Talk to the staff. Help her get back on track. Help her. Not run it. Not fix it. Just help her, like she hadn't spent her entire childhood picking up the pieces every time her sister dropped the ball. She almost laughed at how familiar it felt, being asked to step in after all the damage was done, like her value only showed up when the house was already on fire. She let the silence stretch until she could breathe again. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll come by this weekend. But I'm not making promises until I see how bad it really is." Her mother's breath hitched, relief and shame tangled together. "Thank you, sweetheart. I knew we could count on you." She ended the call and stared at her cold dinner. Part of her wanted to scream, to drive straight to her sister's condo, bang on the door, and demand to know why she'd wasted everything, all that trust, all that history. But she wouldn't. That wasn't her style. She'd go quietly, the way she always had, and look the truth in the face. If they wanted her to clean it up, fine. But this time, it would be on her terms. Because legacies shouldn't be wasted on people who only know how to spend. She drove into town early Saturday morning, passing familiar streets that had barely changed since she left. The cracked sidewalks, the same crooked stop sign near the corner deli, even the hand-painted billboards still peeling from a high school fundraiser 2 years ago, it was all exactly as she remembered it. But the closer she got to the store, the heavier it felt. Not nostalgic. Just tired. The building looked older than it should have. The windows were dusty, the doorframe chipped, and the once bright welcome sign had faded into something lifeless and gray. For a place her sister loved to boast about on social media, it looked like a forgotten prop, all show from the outside, hollow within. She stepped inside to the soft chime of the doorbell, the same one her grandfather had installed decades ago, back when they used to track foot traffic with a handwritten notebook. The scent that greeted her wasn't the warm mix of paper, cedar, and polish she remembered. Now it smelled like dust, cheap air freshener, and something stale, like a space no one had taken pride in for far too long. The shelves were half-stocked, products misaligned, clearance tags dangling on overpriced items no one had touched in weeks. And behind the counter stood her sister, in full makeup, tapping furiously at her phone, barely looking up until she cleared her throat. "Oh. You're here," her sister said, flatly, like she wasn't sure whether to be grateful or defensive. She just nodded and walked past her toward the back office, the same one where she'd spent summers filing invoices and organizing ledgers by hand before they'd gone digital. It was a mess. Receipts shoved into drawers, bills unopened, invoices stamped with red past due marks tossed into a corner like trash. A monitor blinked with error messages. 2 payroll sheets sat on the desk, one with numbers, one with whiteout smudges covering what looked like last-minute corrections. She didn't speak. She just pulled out a chair and opened her laptop. It took 6 hours to dig through the mess, and by the end of it, the picture was clear. They were 2 months behind on rent, 3 on vendor payments. Employee wages had been paid irregularly, some in cash. The credit line was maxed out, and the one thing keeping the business technically open was a long-standing goodwill agreement with an old supplier who still remembered their grandfather and hadn't yet given up on the name. By the time she came out to the front, her sister had retreated to a stool, arms folded, scrolling again. "Do you want to know how bad it is?" she asked softly. Her sister didn't look up. Asterisk if you're just here to scold me, don't bother. It's not as easy as you think. She didn't blink. Asterisk no, it's not. That's why you shouldn't have been the one running it. That made her sister pause, finally meeting her gaze. Asterisk wow. So this is your big chance to say, I told you so? She shook her head. Asterisk no. This is me saying I'll fix it. But I'm not doing it in the dark. If you want help, I need full access, the books, the lease, every document. I want a say in everything moving forward. And if you can't handle that, you want to take over, her sister snapped. Asterisk that's what this is. You think you're so much better. No, she interrupted, voice calm. Asterisk I just think the legacy deserves better than this. If you care more about ego than the business, then walk away. Silence stretched between them. Finally, her sister stood and walked out the front door without another word. She didn't stop her. She simply turned the lock, flipped the sign to closed, and took a deep breath. There was a lot to fix. More than she'd realized. But the fear in her mother's voice, the pleading in her father's eyes, none of that mattered now. What mattered was the name on the building. The promise buried underneath all the neglect. And the quiet satisfaction of knowing she was the one keeping it alive. She didn't ask for the reins. But now that they were in her hands, she wasn't letting go. The first few weeks were brutal. She'd thought she knew every inch of the business, but pulling it back from the edge of ruin felt like untangling a fishing line that someone had knotted on purpose. Every drawer she opened turned up another unpaid invoice, another half-finished expansion idea her sister had bragged about but never executed. Some days, the staff wouldn't even look her in the eye at first. They'd gotten used to being blamed for every misstep, promised raises that never came, berated in front of customers for mistakes that weren't theirs to own. But slowly, they started to see the difference. She didn't bark orders or make excuses. She showed up early, stayed late, did the work no one else wanted. She apologized when she found things they'd been too scared to admit were broken. Word spread that she'd reopened talks with old suppliers, paid down the biggest debt first so stock could actually come in on time again. When a loyal manager who'd quit 2 months earlier heard she was back, he returned with no fanfare, just a quiet handshake and a promise that he'd help her get it done. Meanwhile, her sister hovered like a ghost, sometimes drifting in, sitting behind the counter, pretending to flip through inventory files while sulking over texts from friends who didn't show up at the shop anymore. When she did speak, it was always sharp-edged. Oh, you think you're saving the day? They still know I'm the owner, right? She didn't answer at first. She just kept working, letting her actions speak for her. But one evening, after a long day spent hauling boxes and fixing the ancient receipt printer that her sister had sworn was too much hassle, she found her sister waiting in the office. Arms crossed, cheeks flushed with indignation. I heard Mom and Dad saying you're making decisions without asking me first, her sister snapped. Asterisk this is still my business. You're here to help, not to run the show. She shut the door behind her, the click of the latch echoing in the cramped office. She set down the folder she'd been carrying, the latest financial statements, finally balanced for the first time in months. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Your business. She pulled out the printouts, tapping each line with a calm finger. Asterisk you blew through the reserves in a year. You ordered twice the stock we needed, then couldn't sell it because no one trusts you anymore. You made the staff work double shifts without pay when the cash ran out, but you didn't skip the vacation, did you? Her sister's mouth opened, but no excuses came out. Just a squeak of disbelief, like she was still waiting for someone to defend her. She didn't flinch. Asterisk you ran this place into the ground. Mom and Dad might have given you the keys, but the family name is bigger than you. Bigger than me. If you really cared, you'd step aside instead of dragging it under because you're too proud to admit you're not built for this. The words were like an old splinter finally pulled free. She didn't say them to hurt, she said them because they were true. For a moment, her sister looked like she might fight back, but instead she just slumped into the chair their grandfather had once used. Her eyes darted away, landing on the faded black and white photo on the wall, their grandparents standing proudly in front of the shop on opening day. "What do you want?" her sister muttered. Asterisk, you want me to hand it over? Admit I failed? She knelt down, meeting her sister's eyes so there was no misunderstanding. Asterisk, I want you to care about this place more than you care about your ego. Step down. Let me fix what you broke. I'm not asking for thanks. I'm asking you not to kill what our family built with your pride. Outside, she heard their parents' voices, the same parents who'd once smiled so wide when they gave her sister the business like it was a prize to be worn, not a legacy to be protected. They peered in through the cracked door, seeing the ruin for the first time without rose-colored glasses. When her sister didn't answer, she stood up, calm and certain. I'll take that as a yes, she said softly. And when their mother reached for her hand, whispering, I'm so sorry we didn't see it sooner, she just nodded. She wasn't doing it for their apologies. She was doing it for the name on the sign. For the grandparents who'd given her a broom and trusted her to sweep up the messes no one else would. The paperwork was simple in the end. No shouting matches, no dramatic ultimatums. Her sister showed up at the lawyer's office in oversized sunglasses, sliding her resignation across the table with hands that trembled just enough to betray how hard it was to admit defeat. Their parents sat to the side, looking 10 years older than they had a month ago, their pride bruised but still hovering like they could mend things with the right words. She didn't wait for them to fill the silence. She signed her name where it needed to go, crisp and steady, each stroke of the pen a small reminder that the weight was hers now, officially, fully, and with no one left to blame if it fell apart again. The buyout was hardly worth calling a deal. Her sister didn't fight for a fair share, she didn't have the leverage. The business's debts spoke louder than any lawyer could. In the end, she gave her sister enough to save face, just enough to move on, if she was smart. That was the last kindness she'd give. When the final signature dried, she slipped the folder into her bag and shook the lawyer's hand. Her parents lingered in the hallway afterward, her mother wringing her hands until the skin went pale. You're sure about this? Her mother asked, voice soft but heavy with old guilt. Asterisk, it's so much work, and you've already done so much for us. She met her mother's eyes, and for the first time in years, there was no bitterness there. Just a quiet certainty that hadn't fit her before but felt natural now. Asterisk, it was always my work, Mom. I just stopped pretending I needed permission. Her father cleared his throat, eyes dropping to the worn carpet like he was looking for something to say that could fix the years they'd spent looking past her. But she didn't need it, not now, not with the papers signed and the keys tucked in her pocket, warm and solid against her palm. That weekend, she walked through the building alone, long after the last employee clocked out. She paused in the aisles, running her fingers along dusty shelves, imagining them full again. She made notes on her phone, what to fix, what to clear out, what could be salvaged from her sister's flashy half-baked projects. She didn't flinch at the thought of the work, the extra hours, the calls to old vendors, the meetings with loyal customers to rebuild trust. She'd always worked like this. The only difference was that now the future would have her name on it. She called a meeting the following Monday. No grand speeches, no desperate spin. She told the staff exactly what was happening, the truth they'd already guessed but needed to hear out loud. Some looked worried. Some looked relieved. A few older faces she'd grown up calling aunties and uncles nodded at her with quiet pride. They'd always known who'd be left holding the broom when the dust settled. She made it clear, if they stayed, they'd get steady pay. Respect. A say in what came next. No more broken promises about next month or big plans that never happened. Just honest work, the kind that had built the family name when her grandparents first opened the doors with nothing but a handshake and a dream. That night, she sat at her grandfather's old desk, now hers in every sense. The back room still smelled like floor polish and old paper, the scent she'd once associated with being small, invisible. She opened the new ledger, crisp and empty, a clean page for the legacy they'd nearly thrown away. When she turned the sign to open the next morning, she did it with steady hands. Customers trickled in, some eyeing the new sign on the door that bore her name now, not as a backup, not as a helper, but as the owner. She stood behind the counter, greeting each one with the calm warmth they'd forgotten they deserved. Her sister's shadow still lingered in corners, old posters, boxes of overpriced nonsense that would get marked down and cleared out soon enough. But it didn't matter. This place was hers now, and so was the responsibility that came with it. She'd saved it for her grandparents, for the name above the door. But deep down, she'd saved it for herself, to prove she could do it without the fanfare, without begging for trust she'd always earned the hard way. One by one, the lights came on, the shelves restocked, the regulars returned with cautious smiles. She made her rounds, sleeves rolled up, greeting the day like she had when she was 16, broom in hand, ready to clean up what no one else would. Only this time, she wasn't just the one who stayed late to fix the mess. She was the reason it would never be broken again.